The Tagans really knew how to party 2 billion years ago. Jean-Luc isn't the only reason Vosh is going to Tagus 3. And Deanna Troy's bow and arrow aim is improving, but Geordi's mandolin strumming is not. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we're doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 4, Episode 20, entitled Qpid, story by Ira Steven Behr and Randy Russell, teleplay by Ira Steven Behr. This is directed by Cliff Bowl. The date was 4/20/1991. What an amazing day. We have a very special guest for you, everybody. Ira Steven Behr is here. How are you, Ira?
Hello. How you doing, guys?
So good.
Doing great. I just got to point out really quick the synchronicity. This is season 4, episode 20.
On April 20th.
And it aired on 4/20.
Yep.
Wow, that's amazing synchronicity.
I knew you would catch that. So, and my thought was like, imagine if you're there in 1991 watching this episode for the first time on 4/20. You're like, this show gets me, bro. This show gets me.
Yeah.
Well, Ira, can you get us started off just telling us a bit about, first of all, Randy Russell? I don't know too much about.
Oh, no, yeah. Well, okay. What I did just for you, lovely people, is I went back. Dig this. I have my desk calendars like from all the way from 1988 to today. And I went back and found the 1990 and 1991 desk calendars and pulled them out.
Wow.
Just to see, because obviously I was not on the show anymore. I had left after season 3. And I just wanted to give a timeline. I thought you'd find that interesting, maybe more interesting than talking about the episode. So here it comes. This is what was happening. Now, in my life, just so you know, while all this was going on, I was in the midst of writing a feature film for Joel Silver's production company and Warner Brothers that was going to star Harrison Ford. We probably talked about this, but this is when that was happening. So all through this, everything I tell you, I was also doing rewrites on that movie. And so it was a very busy time. So here we go. Dig this. Wednesday, November 7th, 1990. The 10-year anniversary, by the way, of the death of the great Steve McQueen. Wednesday, November 7th, 1990. Go to Star Trek, talk to Pillar, is what it said. So I was nothing if not terse in my desk calendar. So what I figure is Michael was always trying to get me, to stay involved. He knew I was writing this feature, and I was also pitching another pilot at MGM. Anyway, so I went to Star Trek to talk to Pillar. Now, he had said that they were doing they had been trying to do the show about King Arthur, a Q show about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and that was going to be the gag. But he wasn't liking it at all, and he didn't want to give me the story to read. He just said, "Think about that." So that was on November 7th. Then blah blah blah. I was doing a rewrite. Blah blah blah. Tuesday, November 20th, 1990. Go to Paramount to talk to Mike about Star Trek script. So now it's like, 13 days later, 2 weeks later, and lunch with Ron Moore. So
nice.
It's amazing as I look through this book, how much socializing I was doing with Ron outside of the office, even though I wasn't on the show anymore. But there's all these things: going out to lunch with Ron, going to a movie, going out to dinner with Ron and the woman he was seeing at the time, and Laura and me. It was there was a lot of love at that back then. So that was November 20th. I was still busy. Thursday, December 6th, 1990, Star Trek to discuss King Arthur, Robin Hood. So, as I recall, it was Mike's idea. And he said, well, we're both big Errol Flynn fans. We love the adventures of Robin Hood. This King Arthur thing isn't working. What about Robin Hood? And I said, oh, okay, now you hit me in my soft spot. So so let me think about that, and we'll come back and see what I could come up with. So that was the 6th of December. On December 21st, which is a Friday, Star Trek to break Q Love was the title. Q Love with staff.
Q-Love.
And I remember being in the room with Jerry Taylor and Ron, and I think Brannon was there. It might have been one of the first times I met Brannon, and Joe Minoski, maybe. I don't know.
Mhm.
And so here I was coming back to. I love the title Q Love. It's it sounds like very progressive. It stands for queer loves, and the love story is about Q and Picard is a much more. They should have been the ones stooping, not Bosch and Card.
They were in bed together.
Yeah.
in one scene.
That's who belonged in bed together for sure.
So
So
that
we
was
had
December 21st.
Yeah. So now you could tell we're coming to the holiday season,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because then there's nothing until Thursday, December 27th, which is after Christmas. Star Trek meeting with staff. So obviously it was the second day of coming up with the story, which is normal. And then not until Monday, January 7th, 1991, Star Trek story meeting, which means that's the third, and most stories took back then 2 or 3 days to break. And as an outsider, at that point, it was just an interesting thing to look at how that writer's room worked as opposed to the writer's room I knew from the year before with Hans and Ricky and Ron and Melinda Snodgrass and Mike. So that's just
What was the thing that you noticed differently about the way it worked?
Well, people didn't seem as frickin' miserable as everyone did in the third season. Everyone had decided, except for Ron, who was so new, that everyone was going to jump ship at the end of the year. So it was a countdown, and everyone was so pissed off and so not happy with the series at the time and the direction of the series. With exceptions like yesterday's Enterprise and episodes that people like, but it was still such a difficult, and the debacle of Captain's Holiday and how that changed from what it was going to be originally, the serious show about facing one's mortality and age, and then it became this romp on Risa.
With Rom.
So this episode
It seemed
refers
much more like a normal staff. The staff writers seemed much more nervous, and when they talked in the room, they usually were shot down very quickly. I mean, you could tell the hierarchy much easier than in the writers' room, where we all just kind of sat around, and if you walked in, you couldn't really tell who was in charge, and
Okay.
So that was January 7th. That was the third and last meeting, because on Friday, January 18th, I hand in Star Trek script. So I don't know when I don't know if I wrote a story for it or I didn't write a story for it. It's hard to tell, but I handed in a script. So I wrote that in about 11 days, 10 days probably. Well, 9 days probably. Handed in the Star Trek script on Friday. Now and we're almost done with this, but this one really, I wish I could remember because it just seems so not the norm. On Monday, January 28th, so that's 10 days later, meet with Rick, Mike, and Jerry. Now, I never recall ever having a story meeting with Rick, ever, on DS9 or TNG. So why? So obviously I'm not meeting with the rest of the staff. It's just Rick, Mike, and Jerry. I don't know why. Obviously I'm getting some notes because a few days later, Thursday, January 31st, I hand in the Star Trek rewrite. So that took like 2 days to rewrite whatever their notes were. And then the last thing I have on this is Thursday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. 2 weeks later, I go to Paramount to see Star Trek Castle set and watch some filming. So they were already
Nice.
filming it. And I remember coming to the set just because I wanted to see how they were going to handle the sword fighting and how that was going to look.
That's funny because watching it, I was thinking kind of the same thing. I was assuming it was at Paramount, but it was a good set. It seemed like they put in a lot of work into building something that looked like a castle. And I'm looking at the staging of like how they're trying to maximize, not a ton of space and get the guy, sharpening the axe in the background with the dinner over here and all that. So I was kind of thinking the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember feeling, I mean, you have to remember, I sold this movie pitch for this feature in June of 1990. And from June for the next year and a half or 2 years, it was, that crazy writing, rewriting, meetings, going all over, flying into Jackson Hole to Harrison Ford's house for me. I mean, it was just insane and being treated like shit because you were a writer in movies and it wasn't like TV. You were treated like a problem. You were the problem they had to get through before they can actually do the real work of filming. So that just consumed me. So this was like a vacation for me. It really was. The thing that killed me is, and this gives you some idea of the at the time what passed for Star Trek journalism. A couple of months later, I was in I think I was in a Barnes and Nobles, and I was at the magazine section, and I saw a Starlog magazine.
Nice.
And they had an article with the writer of the first writer of the episode,
Randy.
and it was this long interview, and she's talking all about Robin Hood. And as far as I knew, she wrote a story about King Arthur, that I never saw. I was never mentioned once in the article. It just sounded like she wrote Qpid, and it was like, wow, that's kind of, the kind of journalism that Star Trek deserves.
That's not the only time we've seen a story by person though talking like they wrote the whole thing, but we won't go into that. It happens.
Yeah, I mean, you just could read the credits and see who did the work, a lot of the work on this. Was Vosh part of the original game plan?
It was for me. That was one of the things. I don't know if I have no idea what the game plan was for King Arthur. It never was meant, Michael was very much, I don't want you to think about that. I don't want you to see it. It's like, I want you to have a good time doing this. So you come up with whatever you want to come up with, but let's do, how about Robin Hood? I think that'll be, so I thought, Vosh would add some, there was going to have to be a maid Mary and there was going to have to be some kind of love affair. So it kind of made sense that that would be it. The other thing that I found really amusing was the actor who played Sir Guy of Gisborne was this actor named Clive Revill.
Yeah.
Now, when I was 10 years old, the first play I ever saw on Broadway was the musical Oliver. And Fagin was played by Clive Revill. In the movie in England, it was Ron Moody, but Clive Revill played it on Broadway and got fantastic reviews,
Wow.
right? And the Artful Dodger was played by a young actor named David Jones. Davy Jones, who then became a monkey a few years later.
Davy Jones.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was fantastic as as a little kid. I didn't know who Davy Jones was, but whoever that kid was playing the Artful Dodger. And then a few years later up at camp, I played the Artful Dodger because I loved that role so much. But I loved Clive Revill. I had the album. I played it all the time as a little kid. I thought he was hilarious and sad and funny, And so cut now to like a few years before this Star Trek thing, I'm doing another TV series and we're looking for a villain, and who walks into audition but Clive Revill.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm usually very cool in casting sessions. When I meet actors, I meet a lot of actors I like, and I bring in a lot of actors I like, but I don't let them know that I'm fans at the time because it's got to be professional. But with this guy, I totally broke. And I started gushing to this guy about how much it meant to me, how it changed my life, I realized that acting and the theater and creativity and it had such a huge impact on me. And he looked at me like, whoever you are, disappear out of this room. I never want to see you again. Because I realized this is the guy who's trying to get a role, and he doesn't want to be thrown out of the mood he's in to play this villain. To have this guy just tell him, at the time I had long hair down to my shoulders, I looked like a freak, and it was the most disappointing thing. So
he looked at you the way Picard looked at Q when he showed up in his office.
Yeah, exactly. So when I realized that Clive Revill was playing, Sir Guy of Gisborne, and he was going to be there that day, I did not go over to him. I didn't say hello. I didn't want to, I could not have another broken heart of being dissed by this guy. But what were the chances out of nowhere that he would go, for that part? So that's the other thing I remember about Qpid.
Watching this episode, the one major note I wrote about this fellow, Clive Revill, was that no matter what frame I paused it on, he had an incredible expression on his face. Like 100% acting 100% of the time. And it was like, I kept pausing, take little notes. And every time he's making an amazing face, I'm like, this guy gets it. This guy is good. This guy
good.
Gives his all. I would love to see more of his work.
Yeah, I mean, and let's face it, the truth is he was too old for the role, right? By that point, he was in his late 50s, I think. I mean, it could have been a younger, agile, thinner guy, but it didn't matter. He could play. He played it. He sold it. So that.
Plus, he had a younger guy's wig on. The hair was young.
Exactly.
Ira, I want to ask you about this set, and you talk about having walked on and seen this set that's constructed for this episode. And really, my question is, when you're budgeting these episodes and you have to put on an expense, like it looks like this is a lot of an expense to add to an episode. Do they take away from other episodes and then put it into this one? How does that work?
Well, absolutely, that's what happens. And that's what we had down to a science at Star Trek, which you can't do anymore, it seems. You can't do a really expensive episode and then tell the powers that be, don't worry, we'll make it up with other episodes. At the end of the year, it'll all, if you do a big episode, they freak out on you so much. But at Trek, we had that because they knew we were doing full seasons. We weren't going to be canceled, and they trusted us. How much of that set was smoke and mirrors, and it looks great on TV, but clearly, there's a lot of movie magic going on. Though I do have to say that at the time, I remember feeling pretty good when I was there. I was impressed that they had gone the extra mile. And one of the things about the episode that I was satisfied with was that set.
Yeah, well, it's really hard to fake something like that without kind of giving it a lot. Like a castle looks very different. Like you could maybe get like, a room or two, but if you're trying to show a courtyard or something like that, you really kind of have to give it a lot or it's going to be distracting.
Hey, at least they didn't shoot it in a cave. That would be
So it wasn't,
it looks like a castle kind of, but then back in Robin Hood days, they actually lived in caves.
It was a cave castle. And then it looks like the also the exterior scenes with Worf fighting the horse. I mean, that's all done on location, or
I was at Discondo Gardens. I think we've used that. That's a place where we've done other things.
Is that near Pasadena? I think Pasadena.
Yeah. I believe so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you're doing an on-location shoot. You've got the castle being built. I mean, this is an expensive episode, and actually, one of the things jumped out at me was this is a lot of work to do for one episode in a season. It looked like the work had been done to really get this right. It seemed like it was something they wanted to get right, which I feel like it was done. It passed my visual test. I thought this was very fun. I know you have some criticism of it, but I was watching it with a smile on my face, kind of like the whole time. It felt. You mentioned a vacation. Writing the episode was like a vacation for you.
For sure.
It felt like a vacation for me watching the episode. So the vacation translated through the script. It felt fun.
I just wish it had an energy that the show lacked, that the show needed. It didn't have the lightness of an adventure story. It was very stolid, and shot like, back in the day, back in season 3, my big mantra was, and you might have heard this, Sirach, when I've talked about it in the past. I used to say, this is like Bonanza television. We're shooting this show like it's the 1950s. It's the 1980s, and it looks like something from the 50s. Every shot is these cowboys, waist high people. The camera never moves. People walk into frame, stop and say their lines. Everything's so static. It broke my heart at the time, and watching again, it still did at a lot of level. I mean, it didn't break my heart, but I just felt it was a missed opportunity. And I think, someone like Alan Craker or Jim Conway could have taken that material and probably given it a little more pace, a little more energy, than the show had.
Well, you know what this episode did have, though, was comedy. I was laughing throughout. Now, I'd seen this before, so I knew what to expect. But like with everything else, you watch Take Me Out to the Holosuite, and every time you find something new that's funny that you maybe you didn't fully appreciate every single time. And this one, again, my notes are just full of ha-has. I'm just laughing throughout the entire thing. And I'm thinking, man, Ira, when you were writing this stuff, were you laughing to yourself or were you thinking like, I hope this plays?
Well, I think, to be honest, what I was thinking of was, this is going to get made. We can actually make this thing. And, chances are, the other thing I remember is the opening scene. See, memory plays tricks on you all the time, especially when we're talking this. I know that after I handed it in, and then I was busy, and I told Mike I couldn't do any more. I wasn't going to be able to do any rewrites. I had other things I had to do. I know. I thought there was this. I thought the show started for some reason with Picard giving the speech to the archaeology conference,
Delegation.
but it doesn't. It started with the scene with Troy. I don't think I wrote that scene. I think Michael wrote that scene after I had handed in the material. I don't remember I was there before, but I remember him calling me and saying, "Well, I just want you to know, it's full transparent," because Michael was such a good guy. He wanted me to know, I'm gonna, it needs a new beginning. And I said, fine, whatever you want to do, be my guest. So I know that scene he wrote. I'm not sure. I have a hard time remembering. I know all the Vosh stuff and Q stuff I wrote. I don't remember the scene when they all suddenly become Robin Hood and disappear. Don't know. I know the first scene was not mine. Was Michael's.
Actually, it wasn't even my favorite scene, to be honest with you. The first scene was my least favorite of the scenes, just in full transparency, because I felt like it was slow. And that it didn't. I mean, the thing was moving so slow in the beginning with no dialogue at some points, just moving and watching Picard think and deliberate. And I just felt like this episode could move a lot faster with the story.
Well, also the whole stuff with 10 Forward and Riker and Vosh. I mean, it was just very, very lugubrious. There was no, it's like when Riker says his line. Number one, you set Riker up sitting there, which you didn't need, and then they're standing there like statues, the two women, and then supposedly looking out the window, and then Riker comes walking into frame and says his line. "Oh, yes, it's beautiful, isn't it?" I mean, you could have had that line off screen, surprise them. He walks in, you realize it's just so cookie cutter, by the book, explain everything to the audience. Look, a character is entering and now he shall speak. It's not the most creative way to tell a story. And that's all through that opening. Even the stuff between Picard, now I'm going into my rant, which I apologize to all the listeners. It's been many years. I have not seen this episode. Even the stuff with Q and Picard is so static in some ways, and there's no interaction. And I realized that Jean-Luc keeps himself, his emotions reined in, but it's the same thing every time, and there's no ups and downs, and he doesn't get really pissed off and then calms himself down. It's just so you're just waiting for something to happen. The repartee doesn't sell it enough for me. You've seen it before. Anyway.
Yeah, I wasn't so much against the Q Picard stuff. What I really enjoyed was the Picard sitting at the dinner table with Vosh, and then the awkwardness, because we rarely see Picard in his awkward modes where he feels like very uncomfortable. And it felt like when Crusher walks in on him,
that was so good.
He's busted.
That was so good.
It was
Yeah,
I
see, that
loved
was
it.
some real emotion. That was like human interaction, how people actually behave, And
Yes.
so I agree. I thought that was a nice moment.
Yeah, I
It was
loved it.
great. The
And
him
I'm
saying
surprised.
no, yes. I just as he was so uncomfortable, so
Yeah,
uncomfortable.
I'm a little surprised that you're kind of hard on it, Ira, because I was laughing the whole time. I thought it was now. Of course, I already knew what to expect, so I don't know what it was before being shot. But and by the way,
Right.
everybody at home that's like me, don't worry, I took care of it. I looked it up. Lugubrious, looking or sounding sad and dismal. That's what that means for everybody
Yeah,
that's
thank
like me.
you.
But but yeah, that scene with when Crusher walks in, we're just laughing because we know, like, we've all kind of been there in Picard's shoes,
Yeah,
and we're
that
just like,
feeling.
oh boy, here we
This
go.
looks
I do
this
not want to
looks
be
bad.
Picard right now.
Yeah, but think of how it ends. Think of what could have been that last scene between Bosch and Picard. That push pull of her going, him wanting her not to go. It's just not there. They just don't play it. It's the least passionate goodbye. It's the least. It's like, oh, it's the end of the episode. Next week we're going to have a new adventure, so I can't really get bent out of shape. Even the kiss is kind of like, that's not a goodbye kiss.
Yeah.
If I was kissing a woman goodbye, if I was kissing my mother goodbye, I'd kiss a more, you know, feeling kiss than that.
But what they did do was they had the tension that they have with back and forth, because that whole, you guys are acting like you're already married vibe. I felt that between the two of them, it did have the kind of already married argument stuff. I'm not going to change. Well, you can't change me either type of stuff. So there was a lot of good chemistry stuff that I enjoyed. But Worf, by far and away, I thought you must have had the most fun writing Worf's lines, because these are classic lines. Worf gets to steal the show in this episode several times.
Yeah, I meant to, I still have the greeting card that they made. I am not a married man. My kids freaked out. They could not believe that they were selling, like, at the CVS and the Rite Aid.
Yes.
There's Worf's face in his Will Scarlet, and you open it up. I am not a married man. It was like my kids were very well. My son wasn't even born. I realized my daughter was very impressed that there was a card from Dada.
Well, that line just jumps out, and it's just the way he delivers it with that outfit. I mean, it's perfect for Worf. I thought this is great writing for Worf, and this is the kind of stuff I'm sure Michael Dorn likes to do, where he doesn't have to. He just gets the one chance to deliver that punchline. Like the whole take the mandolin and smash it, and then the sorry line
Yes.
right after that.
Well, that I just did as an homage to the Animal House with Belushi.
Really?
But yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I mean, my, sometimes to the detriment of the show, especially when it got to Deep Space Nine, and all hell broke loose, and we were able to throw in whatever we wanted to at times, which is sometimes a good thing and sometimes not. I just, I had that imp of the perverse that I wanted to just do stuff that you'd never see in a Star Trek episode, So the idea of
Jordy.
Worf saying a line or doing something that Bluto did in Animal House is so, it just doesn't compute. So I just wanted to have that moment. I thought you could get away with it, and I wanted to give Geordi some business. There was, it was difficult to find. I felt horrible for Crusher and Troy once they were. There was nothing for them to do, and they, they didn't give them swords to fight because they were women. So I guess they could in the do any actual fighting. They could hit people over the head with pottery, but they couldn't actually to like
Yeah, that's a
so wherever
stereotype
I could find a little something, I try to give them some humor.
We do have to jump to our
Yeah.
break in just a second. Ira, I don't know if you can stick around a little longer, but
yeah, I whenever I do this stuff with you guys, I always kind of give myself a longer bit of leeway
Very
because I
nice.
know. So
All right.
I have.
All right.
I have
Well, thanks very much. So everybody stick around because there's something I definitely want to point out to Ira, and it is that this episode may be the most memed episode of any Next Generation one. But we'll jump on that in a moment. We'll be right back on the seventh rule.